with Flo Villamino. Hello there.
Hi, Catherine.
And, well, I said headlines, but really photos. We're talking about Hong Kong. Very impressive pictures coming out of there.
Absolutely. It's still front page news in a lot of papers. Let's take a look at The Independent. There's a photo that was taken yesterday of a demonstrator with an umbrella. Umbrella, of course,
It's
the
the
symbol.
emblem, isn't it now?
Absolutely, the symbol of those pro-democracy protests. You can see there, it talks about, ask the question, is this calm before the storm? Hong Kong protesters are standing their ground, but so is the Hong Kong administration. And a lot of papers are focusing on a new strategy that's been adopted by the Hong Kong administration, and that's to wait out the protests. You can see here, this is an article in the Wall Street Journal that takes a closer look at this strategy. And it's basically to let the protests go on until they either taper off or lose support from the wider public. This could be a peaceful resolution to the standoff. That remains to be seen. What's clear, though, is for now, the crowds do seem to be thinning.
They're thinning, but very peaceful, like you say. I think that's something that struck me and a lot of other people who've been following this story. Very polite as well. And you've got some reporters actually talking about that sort of politeness of these protests.
Absolutely. It's a big theme in the papers these days. Peter Popham from The Independent says that the last time he reported on a demonstration in Hong Kong, that was a generation ago when Hong Kong was still a British colony. And at the time, it was very different. It was a rough and coarse affair. This generation of demonstrators is very different. You can see here he talks about the opposite of looting. They're giving things out. They're giving out water, umbrellas, face masks. This protest area is probably the most polite area in the whole wide world. That's what he says. And Slate agrees. We're not seeing the usual scenes that you might expect at such a protest of smashed up shops or violent confrontations with police. We've been used to seeing those images, say, in Cairo or Ukraine, etc. Here you see volunteers picking up trash. You see students doing their homework. Hong Kong has the most polite protesters, and that's why they're so dangerous.
And this is on purpose, then?
Absolutely. That's what Slate says. Don't be fooled. These aren't youthful idealists. These are savvy political operators who understand the success and the secret of nonviolent resistance. And this article in Slate points out that this excessive politeness that we're talking about is actually part of a strategy. A couple of days before the protest started, a manual of disobedience was published online in English and Chinese, describing how protesters should act in this very polite way. And it puts authorities in a very tricky situation, because if they react with violence, well, that's seen as an excessive use of force, and it plays into the hands of the demonstrators.
Now, let's look at how the mainland Chinese press is covering or not covering this. Yesterday, we saw probably the biggest protests yet, I think, the greatest numbers of people out on the streets. Not reflected in mainland China.
Absolutely not. There's still a big blackout in the media in mainland China. This is the front page of China Daily. I once again leafed through the paper, not a single mention of the demonstrators. They're focusing on yesterday. Yesterday was a national holiday in China, the 65th anniversary of China. So you can see here, crowds welcome National Day. So media blackout, also a lot of censorship online, as we've been seeing. It seems like Chinese authorities are really scared about this challenge to their authority. And I pulled out a cartoon in the South China Morning Post, a Hong Kong paper, that seems to describe this. You can see two Communist Party leaders, one saying, okay, so all travel tours to Hong Kong are suspended. What about Texas? And the other guy is saying, no, Ebola is a far less contagious thing than what Hong Kong has got at the moment.
Well, that leads us neatly on to speaking about what is happening in the United States at the moment. Authorities there seeming to be increasingly worried about this one man in Texas who has been diagnosed with Ebola once he'd actually returned from Liberia.
That's right. Now, for now, it seems like the media is remaining pretty calm, not the widespread panic you might admit, but
I was looking on a couple of websites earlier. It wasn't the top story, which
that's right. Seems
I
like
was expecting.
People are trying to remain calm about all this, but you can read in a lot of papers, as you can read here in the Washington Post, that some papers are wondering if there was a mistake in the way the hospital in Dallas handled the situation. The Ebola patient was actually allowed to leave the hospital after he checked himself in the first time. That was on Friday. He reportedly told staff that he had just returned from Liberia, but that information was not passed along at the hospital, so he was allowed to go home. They said he just had a mild fever. He returned on Sunday, and then he was placed in isolation.
Very worrying times for that man, his family, those around, and also the question is, has this virus potentially spread to other people he came into contact with?
That's what a lot of papers are focusing on. You can read about it in the New York Times. Between those 2 visits to the hospital, he continued to interact with people. He came into contact with a number of people, including 5 school children and, of course, the medics who were taking care of him. So a lot of focus on how authorities are going to deal with that. It's definitely something that we're going to keep hearing about in the days to come in the U.S. media.
Absolutely. Just got time for one more story, an impressive picture from Alaska.
That's right. Let's take a look at this picture. It's tens of thousands of walruses who have been beached in Alaska. Now, they've been beached because they can't find ice to perch on because it's melted. These photos have gone quite viral, and a lot of alarm is raised over those melting ice caps.
Okay, raising awareness of another threat there. Thanks very much, Flo Villamino there with a look through some of the top international news stories. We're going to take a short break. Coming up, our top news stories and updates on those, and also our focus report. Now, they call him the anti-political politician, and he is one of the most popular leaders in Europe. We're asking, what's the secret to Matteo Renzi's success, and can he turn Italy's fortunes around? Stay with us for that.